Episode of the Practical SQL Server HA show. I picked today's topic as a side effect of my conversations with customers, particularly when they're in that stage of deploying a new high availability and disaster recovery solution. Because I specialize in SQL Server high availability and disaster recovery, the two most common things that people think about, or my customers think about, when it comes to deployment is the licensing of SQL Server and the hardware cost. It's one of those conversations where this becomes the initial thing, the first thing that comes to mind whenever they're talking about deploying a solution. Um, of course, if you've worked with SQL Server before, you may have been aware of how the changes in the licensing from SQL Server 2012 made it prohibitive for even some customers to move to Enterprise Edition. I remember days when it was a per socket licensing model where, depending on how many sockets you have on your physical machine, that's how much you would buy. But now with more powerful machines, multi-core, multi-socket, it becomes more expensive. Plus the fact that you need to buy like packs of core. Why am I getting blanked here? 4 packs of 1 pack of 4 core licenses. That's what I was trying to say. So when you think about it, and you can do the math, if it's Enterprise Edition, that's about 8 to 9,000 US dollars. Do the math for a 4 core, and we're just talking about a 4 core SQL Server Enterprise Edition license here. That's $36,000. Not to mention, if you're building a secondary node, you got to license that. You got to have software assurance. So this is the first thing that a lot of customers would look at when it comes to deploying a high availability solution running on SQL Server, right? The licensing cost in itself. I remember I was testing a hardware for a customer last year where they gave me a 128 core machine. Do the math. 128 core machine, Enterprise Edition, and in a 2-node Windows Server failover cluster with a 2 replica availability group. Do the math. Enterprise Edition. And when you start to think about it, this becomes the focus of most customers when it comes to deploying high availability solution. It is the cost, right? But the way I look at it is there's always 2 parts of a cost. The businesses, the bean counters will call it CapEx, or capital expenditures. And these are costs. And I don't want to look at costs. I want to look at it as investment. But of course, I'm not an accountant, I'm not a bean counter. Capital expenditures, or CapEx, is the money that you have to pay upfront. It's just like buying a car. When you're buying a car, you're buying for the sticker price of the car, right? If you're buying cash for the car, you're paying for the sticker price of the car. That's capital expenditures. Then there's the other piece of it, which is operational expenditures, or OpEx, which is defined, again, most accountants and bean counters would agree to the definition. It's the cost associated with maintaining that solution. So I'll go back to the car analogy. The sticker price of the car is your CapEx, but of course, your car's not going to sit in your garage. It's not going to be there, making you look handsome because you drive a fancy car. No, you got to drive it to work every day, or if you're working from home, you're going to drive it every once in a while, go to the groceries, go to the park, go take your kids to school, pick them up. Part of the operational expenditures is your insurance, your gas, or for the folks from the other side of the pond, petrol, your wear and tear, your maintenance, for instance, oil change, filter change. All of these factor into how you would drive your car, the day-to-day operations, day-to-day maintenance, and what is necessary in order to keep your car running in good condition. Especially, of course, if you're driving to and from work and you need your car as a means to get to work, right? These are the two sides of it. And the biggest mistake that I've seen a lot of customers and companies who are implementing high availability solutions, is they're only looking at the X. This is actually the biggest driver for a lot of companies moving to the cloud, because as far as they're concerned, well, I'm not going to pay for licenses now. I'm not going to pay for hardware now. I'm not going to pay for all of these now. I'm going to pay for it later. Kind of like a pay-as-you-go thing. But either or, you're still paying for something. Well, if you move to the cloud, watch and see how your bill starts racking up every month. Every time you tweak something, like for instance, you increase your compute, you increase your storage, all of these things come at a cost. The only difference, of course, is, again, on premises, you're buying it now and then paying for operational expenses later versus, in the cloud. But again, this is not a conversation about cloud and CapEx and OpEx. This is all about what people and customers are not seeing when it comes to implementing a high availability solution. So I want to talk about that today. The topic is beyond licenses and hardware, which is the hidden costs of high availability and disaster recovery. Typically, though, when a company or a business, a customer decides, hey, we want to implement this, right? They've already done their math. They've already picked the version of SQL Server that they're going to be running on. Maybe it's 2019 because their third-party application still does not support the latest version. Maybe they're still thinking of Enterprise Edition, and they've already made a decision to do always-on availability groups or failover clustered instances or any type of high availability or disaster recovery. They've already made that decision. They deployed it. Boom. For them, the initial cost or the visible cost is the CapEx, right? The CapEx. I'll use the same analogy with a car later. You're not going to buy a car and just park it in your garage for everybody else to see. Well, of course, if your garage door is closed, nobody's able to see that. But the thing is, you're going to use that car every day, or every time you need to go to work, or every time you need to go somewhere. You're going to be using that car. And that comes with its operational expense. And I want to share with you the three most common operational expense that customers are not aware of the minute that they deploy a high availability or a disaster or a disaster recovery solution, right? Get your pen and paper ready, write this down. I just made sure I laid the groundwork as far as these are concerned, because number one, if you're a SQL Server DBA or a sysadmin taking care of SQL Server, you're not the one making decisions as far as, how much are we going to spend for this, or how deep the pockets of the companies are if you want to buy a new HPE DL380 server or a latest version of SQL Server you're not the one doing that, right? So this may not be relevant to you until you realize that that cost involves you, right? You're the one taking care of it. You're the one managing it. You're part of the day-to-day care and feeding of it, right? The first hidden cost of an HADR solution that you're taking care of as a SQL Server DBA or as a sysadmin or anybody responsible for a high availability solution is, number one, complexity. There is a cost associated with complexity. And I get it. Sometimes, it might be your first time deploying something like this. So you make it as complex and as fancy as it can be so you can put it on your resume, right? It's, oh, I gotta show off, if I'm looking for the right word. I'm going to show off. I'm going to put it on my resume that I built something like this. And then you can describe it: a 4-node Windows Server fail of a cluster stretched across 2 data centers with multiple IP addresses and all of these configurations. You can brag about it, but the cost associated with complexity is the fact that when an incident happens or when an outage happens, the complexity ends up costing you immediate time to resolution. And I've seen this happen so many times when a solution has been built by either a third-party vendor, an external consultant, or even the senior DBAs, and then they left because of how complex it is. There's no documentation available. It takes hours, or sometimes it takes weeks to figure out how it works, who built it, how it was configured. And because there's no documentation in place for them to just refer to if they need to troubleshoot it, or to fix an outage, or to just bring everything back online. More often than not, you as the DBA, as the sysadmin, would be scrambling, trying to find documentation, references, and even trying to figure out how it works, because you're not the one who built it, right? Somebody just handed out over to you. The complexity of such a solution is what makes it costly down the road, especially now with virtualization. I Again, it all depends on how your environment is set up. Typically, if it really is a mission critical system where microsecond transactions are actually costing the company a lot of money, if you're losing that amount of transactions, they're running on physical machines, right? Physical machines, bare metal machines, put on a data center, racked and stacked, and you can touch it. Literally, just go to the data center, you can touch it. A lot of companies would implement something like a failover cluster with availability groups on a VM. So think about that for a second. You're already implementing a high availability solution. In that in itself is already complex. You're putting it on top of yet another high availability solution. And mind you, if you're putting it on a VM, you have to think about uh, you have to think about making sure that both, if we're only talking about two node clusters and two replica AGs, you have to think about high availability for the underlying hypervisor. Because if, well, you already spent the license cost, VM, of course, you're not paying for the VM, you're paying for the hypervisor host. You're already configuring everything, then you also need to configure affinity or anti-affinity for your VM so that they don't end up on the same host when something goes wrong. So you're combining a complex solution with yet another complex solution, putting it on top. It's no wonder when a high availability solution like an always on availability group or a failover clustered instance sits on top of a VM and something goes wrong, the DBA sometimes don't even know what's going on. Right? Even performance issues. You're trying to troubleshoot a performance issue, and you can't really see what's going on. That's because the complexity that's sitting underneath that, the hypervisor layer, whether it's VMware or Hyper-V, the underlying storage subsystem, all of that complexity adds on to this. And that's why, again, people ask, so why is a two-node failover cluster with a two replica AG or two-node failover clustered instance was so popular back in the days? It still is. In fact, it's still, I highly recommend it for one reason: simplicity. You're already building a complex architecture with a failover cluster and an availability group. The last thing you want is complexity when something goes wrong, right? In, One of the reasons why a lot of people fell in love with the iPhone when it first launched was because it was just so simple. It's easy to use, right? If your high availability and disaster recovery solution is so complex that you can't even figure out how to work with it, it is going to cost you a lot of time figuring it out as part of your day-to-day operations. Even worse is when it goes down as part of an outage or when an incident suddenly happens, right? Um, you also need to reconsider, part of that is, part of the day-to-day operations is monitoring. How simple is your monitoring solution? Because the last thing you want is for an alert to come in, and because it's so complex, it's not giving you the information that you need, just ignore it, right? So complexity, that's one of the hidden costs of implementing a high availability solution. We don't look at it as a cost because, for one, well, we're not paying for it. There's no dollar value involved. Um, you know, but licenses have been bought, the hardware has been purchased. So there's no associated cost when something is complex. But you're spending your time, you're spending your effort trying to research an issue. You're spending a lot of man hours trying to figure out what went wrong, or how to figure things out because it's so complex, right? So that's the first one. The second hidden cost has something to do with you, and that is employee burnout. Every time I hear customers implement a high availability solution, I always ask them how many people on the team actually knows how this thing works and how many people can support it. Most of the time, it's an accidental DBA or sysadmin who was given the responsibility to take care of it, and they're the only person on the team doing it. It doesn't make sense because, for one, why would you build a high availability solution that's supposed to be up and running 24 by 7 when you're the only person or when there's only one person on the team managing it, right? If you've been on call, if you've had the opportunity to be on call for a high availability solution, and then it would take you days to try and do a root cause analysis and try to fight fires and solve problems, next thing you know, you're going to get burned out. So that's the second cost. The second hidden cost of a high availability solution is your burnout. I mean, I joke around the fact that I may be a high availability and disaster recovery expert, but I'm not highly available. I'm not 24 by 7 available. I never want to be 24 by 7 available. Being on call for some people is, I want to be on call. They take the on call because they have extra pay. They get paid uh, on call rates. I think that's 1.5 times their normal rate. Uh, Sometimes they get a day off. But the thing is this: if you're the only person on the team who knows how to deal with a complex solution like a high availability solution, chances are when something goes wrong and it stretches beyond your normal working hours, as the case may be most of the time, you know how it is, normal business operations. Things go well. All of a sudden, 3 o'clock in the morning, when you're fast asleep, when you are dreaming of having a vacation, when you are, yeah, sound asleep and not even worried about this, you get that page. And then you have to be in front of your computer addressing the problem. And it depends on what the expectation is. Like when you get a page or when you get an alert, do you need to be, when you get notification for being on call, do you need to be in front of your computer within the, 5-minute time frame, right? It disrupts your sleep. Well, for one, 3 o'clock in the morning, you're getting woken up. It disrupts your sleep, and it disrupts your normal body rhythm, which means by the time you manage to address a problem, for instance, you got a page at 3 o'clock in the morning, the entire system is down, it's a 24 by 7 system. You respond to the page, you fix the issue, you get back to sleep, hopefully you do, and then you have to report to work again the next day. So you're cutting short on your normal sleep hours, and then it happens again the next day because, well, you didn't really fix the root cause. It happened the next day. Man, I don't miss times when I have to be working on a 3-day on-call what do you go series, 3 succeeding days of being on call. I don't miss those days because there's only so much you can take, right? Especially I hear it. I hear people talk about their struggles when they're being on call because it really is causing a lot of anxiety. Now every time their phone rings, it's like they have PTSD. They hear the notification from their phone from a monitoring tool, an alert comes in, and all of a sudden, like, their heart rate starts increasing because it creates that sense of fight or flight mode, right? Again, especially depends on the SLAs that you've set when you're monitoring HA solutions. And again, don't get me wrong. There's a reason why you set up an HA solution. It means it needs to be highly available. That's why I question customers who have HA solution. Yet when I ask them about their recovery objectives, they're like, "Yeah, we can manage to do stuff. We can afford a 4-hour downtime." Like, really? Then get rid of this HA solution. Unless you're in the um, less than an hour SLA when it comes to recovery point and recovery time objective, there's no point. You're just, Again, going back to point number one, complexity. You're just making stuff more complex when a simple solution would be enough, right? So employee burnout is pretty common when it comes to the hidden costs of HADR. Well, again, are you following a certain on-call model where you are assigning, even if you have multiple people on your team, um, are you assigning on call to one person for an entire week and then assign it to a totally different person? Because what happens to that person? Let's say you're the one on call this week, and then several incidents happened this week on your watch, and you still need to do your day-to-day things that have nothing to do with your HA solution. Man, it doesn't matter how smart you are. It doesn't matter if you're a level 4 or level 5 engineer or you're the senior escalation. It doesn't matter if you have, you know, years of experience trying to figure things out and trying to solve problems. When you're tired, nothing matters. You won't be able to do anything. I remember, and one of the reasons I'm emphasizing on this is because I remember working on a client. This was when SQL Server 2016 was released, and I had to work on with the customer where they were deploying a distributed availability group. And out of nowhere, just out of curiosity, I asked the engineers, what's their biggest challenge? And I was kind of expecting something along the lines of, yeah, the latency between the networks, and these are really smart people. Some of them used to work for Microsoft as escalation engineers, but I was surprised I was surprised with their response to that one simple question. Their biggest challenge was work-life balance. I didn't hear anything about the replicas could not sync properly, automatic failover was not, none of that was their main issue. Their main issue was work-life balance. And so I asked them, they have a big team, but they're also managing a very large environment. They've got servers all across the globe. They've got stretched clusters that they're now moving to distributed availability groups. But their biggest challenge was work-life balance. So I asked one of their senior engineers, tell me more. He said, we were just so tired with all of these projects going on and still having to support a mission critical system that I barely get to see my family. And if you cannot even have that work-life balance, you will not be effective at managing or responding to incidents or taking care of this mission critical infrastructure. And we don't think about that most of the time, because when you're in an emergency mode, meaning you respond to an incident, you're in a fight or flight state, you're not thinking about that. All you think about is, I want to solve this problem, I want to address this issue, and then move on. And then I'll just crash in bed at the end of the day, and I can relax. Not really, because you've already disrupted your normal sleep patterns, your daily routines. So now you're struggling. You're going to be struggling with catching up on your normal sleeping patterns as well. So it disrupts the entire week to a point where people are so tired that they just quit. That is not just the cost to the company, but a cost to you if you're responsible for high availability solutions. So those two things, complexity, and I did say three, right? Complexity, right? Making a high availability solution even more complex than it needs to be. Employee burnout, there has to be a proper escalation process, proper on-call scheduling in order for you to have a backup. Again, we're just humans, right? Even a high availability solution has a secondary replica or a standby node or a backup. Even that, the very thing that you're taking care of, has a standby, has a backup. You need to have one too, right? The third hidden cost of any HADR solution is lack of skilled staff, meaning they don't have the right expertise, they don't have the right skill set in managing the infrastructure, right? Either, again, a senior engineer built it, designed it, deployed it, and then all of a sudden he left, with no documentation whatsoever, with no configuration settings, nothing, with no proper handover. Or maybe it is a third party vendor or a managed services provider or a consultant that built it, designed it, deployed it, and then no proper handover, right? More often than not, is the person being tasked to work on a mission critical system or taking care of mission critical system. And mind you, this is part of the operational expense that I mentioned earlier. This is part of the day-to-day operations, is the fact that people who were not properly trained are now being responsible to take care of this thing. I couldn't count the number of times when a senior engineer, maybe working in the industry for like 5 to 10 years, but has never worked on a high availability solution like this, or maybe the guy used to be a developer, ended up becoming an accidental DBA or sysadmin because he was now given, he was voluntold. A typical joke that we usually say is he was sitting right next to the database server. Next thing you know, he's responsible for it. But they were not properly trained. They were not properly equipped to manage a mission critical system, more so something that they need to support 24/7. Right? I kind of refer back to my experience going on a surgery when I broke my leg. How would it feel like if the person talking to me, who is supposed to conduct the surgery, has never done a surgery before? This is his first month of internship. He's not completed his medical degree. How would it make me feel if that was the person taking care of me? I'll be scared. I'll probably just run away as far away as I can, because it doesn't it doesn't reflect trust in the capability of it, or yeah, it doesn't showcase his capability, right? So for me, I wouldn't trust that guy. Yet a lot of people who are now responsible for managing something like this, some people may have background in SQL Server, some people may have background in Windows Server failover clustering. But the thing is, you need to understand both SQL Server and the Server failover cluster, and networking, and DNS, and all of these things, because again, something as mission critical and something like a high availability solution, like an always on availability group, or even a failover clustered instance, relies so much on so many different things that it's not enough for one person to know everything. So you now have to be aware of how the interaction is between SQL Server and a failover cluster, how the nodes interact with each other, how the network traffic works, all of these things. Remember what I mentioned earlier in item number 1 about complexity. They're already building a very complex system. So you have to be aware of all of these things. Otherwise, again, you are taking care of something that you are not well equipped to do so. And I can understand people's hesitation when they say, well, I can't tell my boss because, for one, I might lose my job when I tell them I can't take care of this. I might not qualify for the promotion. But the thing is, you are doing yourself a disservice. You're not doing yourself a favor if you're taking on a responsibility that you're not well prepared for. Okay. If this was development, fine. Go tell your boss. I'll learn it along the way. Go figure it out, right? But if this is a production environment, a mission critical system, you owe it to yourself to say, no, I cannot support this until I know I'm trained enough to take care of this, or until I know I have the right skills in order for me to support this, right? Uh, the cases that I've worked with in the past, where the engineers will try to troubleshoot, they will try to fix issues, not knowing they're actually causing more problems than the solutions that they're trying to solve, is contributing to the cost of how they're trying to support the system. Again, um, looking back at uh, mission critical systems that are generating revenue for the business. I mean, if you're hosting a software as a service platform and you have critical data on your databases, and every transaction lost is a revenue loss for the company, then if you're fumbling around trying to solve an issue, you're costing not just the business revenue loss, you're also costing yourself the confidence, because for one, well, again, a typical engineer would do this, especially those who have not worked with high availability solutions, is they would look at the error message, post it on Google or their favorite search engine, and try to figure out what the first search result is, and then use that, typically. Because if it's on the internet, it must be true, right? So they use that. They'll look at the error message. If it's posted on Stack Overflow or Stack Exchange or the Microsoft Learn forums, they see, oh, this guy has responded to so many questions. Maybe he has credibility. Picks that answer, implements that without actually knowing what is going to happen next, right? You're putting the entire environment at risk, which ends up costing, again, the business potential revenue. And if something goes wrong, costs you your confidence, because next thing you know, I'm not going to do anything anymore because, well, I just broke something. Right, so these are three things, three hidden costs of HADR, and these are kind of like high level, because if you dig deeper into these, the complexity can spawn more hidden costs of implementing an HADR solution. That's why one of the things that I ask my customers, if they're in the stages of trying to plan for an implementation, I ask a lot of questions that gets us clear, that get us clear to three things. Number one, what is the recovery point objective? How much data can you afford to lose, right? Second one is the recovery time objective. What's the available downtime, or the allowable downtime? And then what's the business impact? If we're not clear on these three things, implementing an HADR solution or even an HA solution will just add more to the complexity. It would add more to employee burnout. It would add more to not having the right skills for you to deploy it or even to support it down the road. So I would immediately discourage them at all from implementing something as complex as that. We first have to be very clear at those three things. If they say, okay, yeah, we need this because it's part of our policy requirements, it's part of our mandate, it's a government regulation, and we don't have any choice, despite the fact that the recovery point, recovery time objectives, and business impact is not really as stringent, then we go ahead with it. But we need to be very clear that there's more to it than licensing and hardware costs. Part of that is operations. I also am surprised at the number of environments where I would see somebody would deploy a high availability solution. Somebody would pay Microsoft very expensive licenses and not have a proper monitoring solution. It's just like saying you're buying a very expensive car, but you don't have the dashboard. So you don't know exactly what's going on. How will you be able to drive it, right? So even that part of the evaluation for the cost that you need to consider are these three things: your complexity, your employee burnout, and the lack of skills for you to support this platform, right? Again, three things that are I would consider hidden costs for running HADR solutions. And if you are looking at managing or already managing a very critical or mission critical solution, and you're thinking, wait a second, yeah, I'm struggling with this. I'm the only person managing it. I don't know what I'm doing. Uh, or maybe you already know what you're doing, but you're still the only person working on this. Reach out. Use this link on the screen to schedule a strategy session. We can come up with a strategy that you could present to your boss on how to properly resolve that, because it's going to be your life, your career on the line. Not to mention, of course, um, introducing additional risk to the business when you cannot properly support or maintain or even troubleshoot when something goes wrong a mission critical system, right? Use that link on the screen, schedule a strategy session, and let's talk. If there's anything I can do to help, I will do my best to do that. If not, I will steer you in the direction that would help serve you best. Again, use that link on the screen, schedule a strategy session, and let's have that conversation. Right? That's about it for this week's topic. And I like having these conversations with customers and having these interactions with them, understanding what their challenges are, and looking at some of the cases and some of the projects that I've worked with in the past, and find correlations and some of the insights that I learned from these. It's interesting. Somebody once told me that the problems that we are solving today are the same ones that we have been solving several years ago. They're just different variations, and most of the time we're just not equipped to solve the problems, the technical problems of today that may necessitate that you would reach out and ask for help. So again, use that link on the screen, schedule a strategy session, and let's help make let's make help or let's make that thing a if that's a problem that needs to be resolved, let's make it happen. Right? Tune in again for another topic next week, and if you have a topic that you want me to cover, if you have an idea or maybe a challenge, post it on the comment section. I'd like to hear from you. Uh, Maybe you want me to cover something or talk about something that you may have a question on a specific implementation. Again, use the comment section, leverage that, and I would love to hear from you. All right? Enjoy the rest of your week. I want to say weekend because, again, Friday should be the start of the weekend. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Hopefully, you're not on call. And if you are, prepare for the on call. I just say that because, again, I don't miss being on call. That's one thing that I have tried to avoid when I was in operations, and I sure do not miss being on call. Anyway, enjoy the rest of your weekend. I'll see you again next time.